The following tone is a reference tone, recorded at our operating level.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Squat Cobbler. No, this is not the fuckisode, but it's the barely happened episode. We have been plagued with technical problems tonight. I am Mike Belinsky. You can find me at Official Pagan on just about everything.
And hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Toole at KELLYTHUL on Twitter. Thanks, Mike, for taking care of the whole are we going to need to make this explicit or not right off the bat. Always handy. Appreciate the help.
I like to just get that out there.
You're a team player. I appreciate it.
Hey, I do what I can. But tonight, we are back on our Alice Cooper series, and we're going to talk about the last proper album by the Alice Cooper Group. Kind of a sad moment.
Muscle of Love. Listen, all you sickos out there that think that that is a inappropriate terminology, your heart's a muscle.
That's what you thought the first time you heard that title, right?
Absolutely. What else could you possibly think of?
Especially when you take into consideration that Liza Minnelli did background vocals on a song here.
And the Pointer Sisters.
And the Pointer Sisters. If ever there were collaborators for the Alice Cooper Group, it's Liza Minnelli and the Pointer Sisters. Well, we'll get to that when we hit the individual track. But before that, do you have anything general to say about this record, Kelly?
So, as the last Alice Cooper Group album, it's to me a bit of a disappointment when you kind of had this kind of succession of Killer, Love It to Death, School's Out, Billion Dollar Babies were just kind of hammer blows. And then this becomes the final group outing. And so to me, while I enjoy this album, it's a good album. To me, it doesn't approach some of the magic. It's got moments, but it doesn't really hang together. It has probably the best packaging of any of the original Alice Cooper albums because this came in a cardboard box, pre-stained on the bottom, a suspicious stain that you're not exactly sure what that's all about. It included a book cover for the Institute of Nude Wrestling, as well as a bit of a storyline on the album sleeve, or the inner album sleeve of the Department of Nude Wrestling, and Alice and the crew dressed in sailor suits, which was a good look.
Now, Kelly, do you think to promote this show, we should do some sort of a photo shoot with us in sailor suits?
I think that would be most excellent. I think you could pull off the kind of traditional white, what the Alice Cooper Group did in here, kind of the traditional navy whites and the kind of odd sailor cap. But I also see you kind of really pulling off more of that large admiral hat, kind of the Russell Crowe master, whatever. That would be good too. I could see you as more of an English sailor with a big hat.
You know, I've never thought of it before, but now that you say that, I realize what's been missing from my wardrobe this entire time.
You don't see them in stores very often, but that big old sailor hat would be pretty cool.
Definitely. It does have cool packaging. I remember coming across this one. This is one of the few of the early Alice Cooper Group records that I wasn't introduced to from my dad's record collection. I actually came across this in a used record store in the cardboard box and everything, and I thought it was really cool packaging, as you mentioned. I didn't realize at the time, because I was kind of just getting into Alice Cooper, so I didn't know where – I knew the Alice Cooper Group and the solo stuff was separate, but I didn't know where the Alice Cooper Group records ended at that time. So at the time that I picked it up, I didn't know this was the final Alice Cooper Group record. And I think you summed it up really well in saying that, you know, after 4 albums in a row, 2 of which I think we can agree are just classic, near perfect, if not perfect albums, and 2 that are just, you know, classic rock records. After those 4 albums in a row, while this is a really good album on its own, it doesn't stand up to those.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it's, you know, and it's weird because you go through the track list and there's a lot of strong songs. Different again, you got nice diversity again, but there's a lot of strong songs, particularly for me, front half of the album, stronger. It really for me tapers down as this album goes.
I completely agree with that. I think it's definitely a front-loaded album. The way that I would describe it to somebody, and I never thought this before, I thought it today because I do re-listen to these albums before we do these shows. This is not one that's in regular rotation for me. In fact, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I mentioned that I haven't listened to anything off of this in a few years. Listening recently to Billion Dollar Baby start to finish, and then listening to this, I would say you can almost think of Billion Dollar Babies as like a big, excessive party, and this is like the hungover walk of shame after it.
I could buy that. I don't know. The other, so one, conceptually, it doesn't hang nearly as well as it did. And it varied because, like, Love It to Death really didn't necessarily have this kind of beyond great stuff. Didn't have this connective theme, with Schools Out, with Billion Dollar Babies, and even early with Killer, you did have that kind of thread that kind of thematically held the album together. And this has got a little bit of kind of urban sexuality in there. That's about, if I tried to kind of say, well, this is their album about, and I think it's about, this is their album about, they got really successful. They recorded their previous album in Connecticut. They realized New York was a lot cooler. They hung out in New York and had things to say.
Well, you mentioned New York, so I feel like that kind of takes us right into our first song, Big Apple Dreamin'. What are your thoughts on this one, Kelly?
So amongst probably not my favorite track on the album, but close. A very strong start. So as I first purchased this album and put it on, this first song comes off, and I'm like, I'm in great shape here. This is the Alice Cooper group I know and love, and they're hitting it. They're picking right up where they left off. The actual title of the song is Big Apple Dreaming Hippo, which for a long time, Hippo's parenthetic on the title. I really had to kind of scratch my head because there's no mention of Hippo in the lyrics. There is a lot about Big Apple Dreaming, and it is about New York and kind of hanging out there. But it turns out, and do you know where the hippo comes from, Mike?
No, I don't.
So there was a club, the Club Hippopotamus in New York City was a club that the Alice Cooper group spent a lot of quality time during the recording of this album and before it. And so it's just a shout out to their favorite club in New York as well. So that's where that comes from. But this is a good song. It's rock, good strong stuff, and Alice is in good vocal form. This one was actually written by the full group as far as a writing credit goes, and I think it's a strong start to the album. What are your thoughts?
Same thing here. I starting it up again. This is actually one of the couple of tracks that really stood out for me on this record. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's definitely up there, maybe number 2 or 3 on the album. The second half of the album is where it really kind of downslides for me. But this is a good start. This sounds like the Alice Cooper group we know and love. And that's kind of important because this record, unlike the previous few, was not produced by Bob Ezrin. So sometimes when a band, messes with a winning formula, you do kind of have to wonder how the results are going to be.
Yeah, and I think he's missed to me because I think that, it was that whole combination of once he first started working with them on Love It to Death. And so you look at the album before Love It to Death, and you look at Love It to Death, and you see the difference he makes and what you get from the group. And then he's stuck, he was then there for the next several albums, and he did not produce this album. You notice it.
You definitely do, and that's not to take anything away from Jack Douglas, who was one of the producers on this, because I know he had done some great stuff. But I really think certain bands, when they link up with a producer that they really work well with, that producer not just brings out the best in them, but really focuses them. So when this starts off with Big Apple Dreaming, you kind of, like you said, it's the Alice Cooper group that you know. And as we said, though, as the album kind of progresses, you do start to lose that. And that's why this isn't on the same level as the previous 4 albums that Bob Ezrin did produce. And it's not that they're bad. Like, nothing, as far as I'm concerned, nothing on this record slides all the way back to the first 2 albums.
I would agree with that. I believe there's one song that actually was written during first 2 album time frame.
Yes.
That brings you perilously close.
There's nothing like in our rankings, like just as a spoiler in our rankings, this is not going to fall below those first 2 records for me. But it, compared to the previous 4 albums, is not as focused or sharp. So do you have anything else to say about Big Apple Dreamin'?
Nope, except it's a good song. You should listen to it if you haven't ever heard it before. It's great.
Is a good song. If you were making an Alice Cooper playlist, like a definitive Alice Cooper playlist, this would probably be on. Second song, Never Been Sold Before. Kelly, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, we've been waiting to hear Alice play a prostitute, and so we get the opportunity in this song for him to sing kind of point of view from a prostitute's point of view, how the prostitute feels. And it's a good song. It doesn't have the strength of Big Apple Dreaming, but it's a solid song. This is where we start to get hints of, wow, there's going to be a lot of female backing singing on this album, and this is the first place we start to get a little bit of an indication of what's going to come a little bit more heavily in the second side. But I like this song. It's got a good narrative to it. It's got a nice bite to it. It's a good rock song. It's not, the hammer down guitar kind of rock, but it's good. It's a good solid song. I enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. It's a solid song, and particularly the first two songs on this record, and what kind of made me feel, like I said, about this being sort of the hungover walk of shame afterwards, is you could almost say that these two songs sort of deal with excess in a similar way that we had seen on Billion Dollar Babies, but on Billion Dollar Babies, it's sort of like someone riding that wave of excess, whereas this is from the perspective of somebody kind of on the other end of that. Okay, so after that we have Hard-Hearted Alice. Thoughts, sir?
So I have no quibble. Execution-wise, they pull it off. This is a much more ethereal, spacey, soft-ish song. More kind of, I don't know, you're going to say vocal harmonies, but it's definitely not a foot stomper by any stretch of the imagination. It's well crafted for what it is, but this is where all of a sudden where you have this kind of building rhythm within the other albums of just kind of, big hit, just very strong stuff. This is one where it just all of a sudden starts to feel like, yeah, that's not bad. It's not a bad song, but it doesn't feel like it's pulling towards anything like the rest. So this is the first part where I just kind of, I started to feel a little momentum drift off. It's not a bad song. I don't dislike it, but it's definitely, if I'm pressed for time and I want to make my way through Muscle of Love, this one may not make it all the way through before I advance to the next track.
Yeah, you definitely hit it there. I wouldn't really listen to this one all the way through. It's not a full skip for me. There is one of those coming up. It's not a full skip for me, but you really kind of touched on something where, we're losing the focus now. And what's interesting to me is I like listening to albums all the way through. And I like the way the songs are placed because, to hear kind of how the band wanted the flow of the album to go. And for me, this album really, like I said earlier, kind of starts off fine, loses steam really quickly, and a lot of it just kind of feels like it's just hitting the middle for me.
Yeah, I don't want to completely call it filler, but it does feel as they were completing. I can't imagine this was on their super short list of here are the tracks we're going to have on this album, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say filler either, but it's just material that's not as strong as what we had seen in the previous albums. So up next, we have Crazy Little Child. What are your thoughts on this one?
So mixed emotions on this one. So it does contribute to, again, if there's a storyline or a feeling or just kind of a general building upon, this song does nothing for that. It doesn't do that, but it's kind of like a jazzy little number. I really like the song though. I think it's fun. I enjoy the song quite a bit. It's certainly again we're back from it's much more piano dominated than guitar dominated. I do enjoy it, but it doesn't do anything to kind of move the narrative forward. It doesn't do anything to kind of reinforce the kind of the spirit of the album. It just seems to kind of like have popped in there. But I do actually, it's one of the more enjoyable songs for me on this, but it's a very squirrely, different kind of, I've never, this is the first time we hear the Alice Cooper group do a song like this.
It is the first time we hear something like this, but again, for me, it doesn't fully get there for me. And that's kind of my overall feeling with this record. Like a lot of it just kind of hits the middle for me. And while there's stuff in the crafting of this song that I really like, this isn't a go-to when I want to listen to the Alice Cooper.
Yeah, this one's just got a quirky little place in my heart. I don't know, like, I always just kind of like it. But yeah, it's in terms of just it's just an enjoyable. It is it's a 5-minute song. I mean, it's not short.
No, it's not short, and it is one of the longer songs on this album. I actually think the opening song might be the longest,
Mm-hmm.
but this is up there with that. And it also finishes out side one, which is the stronger side in my opinion. And like I said, most of it kind of just hit in the middle. So this isn't one of my favorite albums. So here we go. Side two, Working Up a Sweat. Can't wait to hear your impressions on this one.
Passable to me. This is a song I don't dislike. It's like, oh crap. But it's just, there's not much about this song that stands out. There's not a guitar riff. There's not rhythm stuff. Again, we've got the doo-wop female backing folks coming in big time on this song. It moves along at a pretty good clip, and it probably thematically fits in general with where I kind of think this album's going. But this is the C student of the album for me, is that it's acceptable. You didn't fail, but you certainly didn't do anything to get me excited.
I gotta say, for me, this one is a skip.
Yeah, there's not much to it that you want to kind of grab onto.
Exactly. It just doesn't have that sort of Detroit rock, great classic guitar riffing that we've got used to hearing over the last 4 records, and does pop up again in the first couple tracks on the first side of this. It's just gone here. Like, this to me is sort of the No More Mr. Nice Guy of this album, and it's a skip. In fact, listening to it again so that we could do this podcast about it, it was a little tough to get through this one.
Yeah, like I said, it's just there's not much in this. There's not much in the song where I could stand up and say, well, this part's really good about it, because it's just like, yeah, all right, marking time.
Yeah, once you heard it, it's not really something that I see people revisiting too often. Now, after that, we have the title track, Muscle of Love. What are your thoughts?
So I don't know this for a fact, but if I were to guess, as the group got together, when they still had their high energy and they were trying to figure, before they started the Walk of Shame on here, they probably said, hey, we got Big Apple Dreaming and we got Muscle of Love, and they're like, damn, we're going to have a killer album here, because there's like two. For me, Muscle of Love is my favorite track on this album. There's some really awesome guitar stuff that goes on in it. It just lumbers through big time. It's got a swagger to it. The introductory guitar lick that also kind of a pretty close version of it also ends the song is kind of iconic for me, for Alice. It's so iconic that in a number of concerts, when they would kind of finish doing an encore and the crowd's kind of really cheering, so it'd be School's Out or Elected or whatever they were doing, and everybody's cheering, then all of a sudden one of the guitarists would just do this final guitar lick of Muscle of Love, and it was perfect. It was just because it's just like, that's Alice Cooper. So I'm a big fan of this song.
I like this song as well. I think it's probably my favorite on the album. It's certainly the highlight of side 2.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, because we're about to go some weird places on side 2. So it's no doubt the highlight of side 2, but it's definitely my favorite on the album. Definitely. And like you said, I mean, if you can cull through this album and pull a few gems out of it, and this is one of them. And unfortunately, though, there's a couple weird things on this album and a lot of songs that kind of just hit the middle, as I said before. But I did a little bit of research for this album, and I came across an interesting quote from Alice Cooper that said that the title track is, and here's the quote, "It's about a kid who just learned how to masturbate." Now, Kelly, if you were going to write a song about someone discovering the joys of masturbation, what would you call it? Because I think Muscle of Love is a great title.
What would I call that song?
Because I don't know if I could come up with something better.
I could only come up with a second best title, because this is it. And with that insight, and you go back and listen, I mean, it's fairly evident when you kind of unpack his lyrics here that this is a little bit of what the theme of this song is about. I read Dad's books like I did before. Now things are crystal clear. It's pretty good. Yeah, but I don't think I could top that as a title. I think they nailed it.
Absolutely. And of course, this leads us into what I thought may have been your favorite song on the album, if not Muscle of Love. And I'm sure all of the squatties, when they get to it, Man with the Golden Gun. Now, Kelly, that title might be familiar to some of our listeners. Do you want to let them know why?
I believe if you do it, I did some deep internet research prior to it, and I believe this was actually the title of a James Bond movie.
Yes, it was.
Alice the group really wanted to write one of the theme songs because they're always a very big portion of a James Bond movie is that introductory song. And they wanted to write it for Man with the Golden Gun, but they apparently got it done a little late. They'd already made their selection. Well, in terms of an Alice Cooper Group song, this does nothing for me in terms of an Alice Cooper Group song. In terms of a James Bond theme song, it'd be a very passable good one, I think, for that. But as from an Alice Cooper album record, if you didn't make the soundtrack for Man with the Golden Gun, you probably should have parked this bad boy.
Yeah, that's the thing with this song, other than the fact that Liza Minnelli and the Pointer Sisters sing back up. It's a weird choice when the song wasn't selected for the movie, whether it's because they got it in late or any other reason. It wasn't selected for the movie. It's weird to still go ahead and put that on your album for me.
Yeah, because it certainly has no relationship to anything else on the album.
Right, and that's the thing. Like it's almost like if a band did a jingle for a product and it wasn't used, and they were like, you know what, we're putting that soap song at the end of the record.
Yeah, and it showed a little bit of their, I guess, craftsmanship or whatever in that, there's a certain trope to what a Bond song was supposed to be like during these times. And they touch all the bases on that. There's the horn section, there's the big female background section to it. The lyrical phrasing is all very Bond theme song-esque. So in terms of, it's very serviceable to be a candidate for it.
Oh, absolutely. Now, what are your thoughts, though, on the Bond songs in general? Like, do you like the Bond theme songs?
No, I don't.
Okay, good. We're on the same page then. I have never liked them, but even, throughout the years, they have tended to be popular songs.
Yeah, they have, and I'm sure that was a certain amount of interest from the group standpoint. So, yeah, a few extra dollars, a few extra royalties wouldn't be bad, and if it had actually been the theme song, it would have probably been a nice little income stream for them. But,
absolutely, and if it had been chosen as the theme song, then it would make sense to include it on the album.
Right. Yeah, but when it didn't, it's like, okay, because again, it's just zero thematic connection, and it's a very serviceable execution to say if you're going to do the prototypical Bond theme song, it would sound like this. But that's not what I buy Alice Cooper albums for.
Right, and you really summed it up perfectly. As a Bond song, this works fine. Makes no sense here, though. But it's followed up by Teenage Lament 74, which, and I'm not sure if you feel, I think is probably one of the better known songs off this record, right?
Yeah, inexplicably, in my opinion, an album that has Big Apple Dreaming and Muscle of Love. Now, I guess I do recognize, since it doesn't take a rocket scientist to start to unpack Muscle of Love and understand the storyline behind Muscle of Love, that may not, in the mid-'70s, have said, oh yeah, let's get this into heavy rotation on the airwaves. It is, I think it's the song, if any, on this album, it's the song that someone could mention. Because I think if you have people who are like somewhat Alice Cooper fans and you bring up Muscle of Love and you ask them to name a song or two off of it, I think they struggle. Teenage Lament 74 is the one they'll come up with. And I've wanted to like this song because it was like, it is the one that everybody that is at least mentioned off of this album. I think it was the single that was released off of this album.
Let me double check really quick because I do have that. There was two, the title song and this, and the title song did not chart. This made it to number 48.
And again, we get a little. I think it's the Pointer Sisters again that join in for some of the background vocals on this one. So this is like, we talked about I'm 18, which was about kind of teenage angst and coming of age and the challenges. I'm a boy and I'm a man, and there was like kind of a real gritty reality to I'm 18. And even though poor I'm 18 was surrounded by much stronger stuff, it's obviously an incredibly well-known and beloved Alice Cooper song. So this feels like a chapter 2 of I'm 18, and a very weak follow-up, because to me it owes its heritage to I'm 18, and it doesn't even come close to pulling across lyrically or musically the punch that I'm 18.
Absolutely. This definitely feels like a sequel to 18, but with extremely diminished returns.
Yeah, and I don't know why it's the song that everybody knows off of this album.
Yeah, especially when Muscle of Love is a much better song, and Big Apple Dreamin' is one that I don't really see like on compilation albums or anything like that, and to me that's probably the second best song on the record.
Yeah. I've never understood why it hasn't gotten any love, because it is very strong. But most of the first side's pretty strong. But yeah, so it don't hate it, but this song again, another one that doesn't, and this was a strange experience, because you mentioned two or three songs here are like, get by, don't know. You didn't have those runs on the previous albums. You might have one. This song's not as strong as these other 7 songs, but that's about all you had. So.
Right, and like Kelly and Pat Boone love Nowhere Mr. Nice Guy, but I mean that's a more passable song than this, as far as I'm concerned.
You're just not going to let that go, are you?
Oh, did I mention that again? I didn't even realize.
No, it's hard to believe.
I'm just saying Teenage Lament 74 would be Pat Boone's favorite song off this record.
Oh.
So I wasn't really sure where you would fall.
Au contraire, my frere, I believe that Pat would be doing The Man with the Golden Gun. But
yeah, you know what? You're right. He probably would. With Liza Minnelli again.
He would not be doing Muscle of Love.
I think that's a fair assessment. I would put money on that. Well, what about our final song, Woman Machine?
So I reflected on this. I'm not sure I've ever made it all the way through this song. So unless it was left unattended and playing as I was away from it. This was written during the Pretties for You Easy Action time frame. That makes a lot of sense as you listen to it, because its bones are pretty much is a little bit of that. So it's pre Ezrin influence, pre Detroit rock influence.
And you don't mean that in a good way, right?
Yeah, I do not mean that at all. Kind of it's kind of an interesting woman robot song, in terms of this. So don't get a whole lot of those. So that part's interesting. I will give it props though. At the very end, there's a mechanical voice kind of talking as the track fades out, and it's actually it's distorted electronically, but they're actually reading from a vacuum cleaner repair manual. Is what's
where all great rock and roll lyrics are born. It's not a great finish to a weak half of a record, other than the title track, which is the only thing that salvages the B-side of this.
Yeah, and it's a real shame, because this is the last track of the last album by the Alice Cooper Group. They kind of go back to their roots. Remember this? Remember we used to do something like this?
I mean, I guess, you know what? If you put it that way, I guess it is sort of fitting. But at the same time, it's like, hey, I feel like this wouldn't have happened with Ezra at the helm.
I would agree. And it just feels like, so the first side of this album was 4 songs. The second side's 5. And at that point, typically at this point in time, you really wanted to be careful about most groups releasing an album that had like 7 or 8 tracks. You wanted to, be in the 9 to 10 range to have people feel like they were getting their money's worth. And so it just feels to me, to a degree, they said, crap, we can't just have 8 songs. We're going to have to put one more song on here. And they said, Michael Bruce dusted off, hey, what about Woman Machine? and oh, that sounds pretty cool. And
I guess if, like you said, if there is sort of a loose theme to the album, it's about sort of urban sexuality, and I guess it sort of fits with that. Here's the thing, though. Sometimes when you throw away an idea, it's not a mistake you made. It's because that idea sucked and you had better ideas.
Yeah. They need to reflect on the fact that this song did not make the cut for Pretty Sure You're Easy Action.
Right. This wasn't good enough to make it on your worst records.
So that should have been a clue, but
probably should have stayed buried.
Yeah, and this is the first time in a long time on the Alice Cooper Group's music that I've got a song that I'm just like, wow, I really dislike this song. But
yeah, it's really the second full skip of the album for me. Man with the Golden Gun, while I don't like it, I'm not necessarily, skipping it, because it is kind of a weird oddity. It just doesn't work, and certainly doesn't work in the context of the album. But it's a weird, fun kind of oddity every now and then. But Woman Machine, I probably listened to it the first time I heard the record, and then again today to prepare for this episode.
Yep, and I did not. I did the prep too, and I still didn't make it through. I remember this. Okay, so I think it's that time.
Yep.
So we have 6 albums so far. This will be the 7th. Mike and my list are remarkably similar. The one subtle difference will be there's an asterisk sitting across the top of the first 2 listings for mine. I have Love It to Death and $1 Billion Babies as a tie.
And that's only because you can't let go of your previously wrong thought process that puts $1 Billion Babies somehow as good as or better than Love It to Death.
Yes, I continue to hold my opinion on that. So but basically we've got Love It to Death, $1 Billion Babies, Killer, School's Out, Easy Action, and Pretty's for You is the current order. Muscle of Love, where does that nestle into the list for you?
For me, this is going to be number 5.
And we're going to stay very much in sync, even no asterisk necessary on this one.
No.
It is, as we always kind of segment those first 2 albums away from
Yeah, spoiler alert for me, I think they're going to stay at the bottom. I don't know if anything is worse than those.
It's a tough floor to break through. I think that it would take something.
Yeah, they are aggressively unenjoyable.
Very good way to put it. Yeah, but of the
But if you want to stay positive though, you can say they are the best worst albums by the Alice Cooper Group or Alice solo.
And so if we kind of segment those away, kind of ignore they exist, and talk about the Alice Cooper Group when they kind of truly hit their stride. Sadly enough, Muscle of Love is the worst of those 5. So
it is. This is the sound of a band sort of running out of gas.
Yeah, and so that'll be very interesting to see as we then go into what becomes Alice's solo career, and some things start to get a little different as Alice goes solo. And then what you and I, Mike, are going to need to figure out is, do we make this pass through really just sticking with the Alice Cooper Group and Alice Cooper solo, or do we deal with the occasional fringe album? Because shortly after so Welcome to My Nightmare will be the next one up, Alice's first solo outing. So we'll be talking about that shortly after. I believe it was shortly after Welcome to My Nightmare came out. The remaining band members, and they added an additional guitarist, formed a group called $1 Billion Babies, and they released an album called Battle Axe. And so at some point we'll have to decide if we're going to tackle that bad boy, include him in the list, or not. But I think probably for our first pass through, let's just kind of stay with the Alice Cooper canon. But there's a few outliers there that we probably should talk about Battle Axe at some point.
I agree with that. There's a few, maybe a live record or compilation that we should throw in there as well.
So there we sit. We continue to stay pretty much in sync. I think as we kind of get into these next stages, I think this is where we'll start to. Although I bet you, we may go a couple more weeks where there's not a lot of divergence, but we'll see. It
will definitely be interesting, and I think as we hit sort of those like middle solo records, that's where I want to see where we both fall.
Yep. And then I shared with Mike in between shows, some not nearly as qualified as Mike and I entity had gone out and ranked all the Alice Cooper albums, and they were clearly wrong on many levels.
Oh, yeah.
Ridiculous.
Definitely wrong. Yeah. In fact, they had the first 2 records like middle of the list, right?
Yeah, because I just assumed when I said, okay, we're ranking them from worst to best, I said, well, I know what I'm going to see here, and I was quite surprised that I didn't see one of those 2 albums as the worst. And then I was increasingly surprised that they didn't actually show up until they were still in the bottom third. But there were like about 4, 5, 6 albums that they put below them, which to me was crazy talk. But
oh, absolutely, yeah. Although I do know that their album that they chose as the worst is not your favorite by a long shot.
They had it in the right general location, and that thing should be very much towards the bottom. Even with my strong dislike of that album, I'm not sure I could place it low. Easy Action's and Pretty for You. Alrighty, so we will continue on. Next up will be Alice's first solo outing, Welcome to My Nightmare.
With Bob Ezrin back.
Yes, and you can tell.
Yes, you can.
It makes a difference, that's for sure. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and of course we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the regular Squat Cobbler, and then a couple of weeks after that, you're going to hear us talk about Welcome to My Nightmare. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.